Hello everyone and welcome back to our lectures on the Exalted Treatise on the Response of the Tao. And today the passage that we're going to look at is this one. Mislead, deceive, malign and expose relatives of the same or different surnames. So it's basically talking about misdeeds or misconduct towards extended family, all of our family members. And if we sort of break this down, because there's a series of verbs there. In fact, each of the four Chinese characters that I've sort of highlighted in blue have a slight, you could say, variation of the idea of misleading or deceptive conduct. So if we were to break them down, I've put 4 bullet points there. The first relates to fabricating claims. This is obviously have no ounce of truth, no shred of evidence. So, making false accusations. The second Chinese character, it relates to treating what is false as the truth, as something real or substantial. And then, generally being misleading and deceptive, misrepresenting the nature of something, and ultimately pretending, making false show or appearance of something. These are all, you could say, types of ways of misleading or deceiving someone. And if we move on to the second part of it, these actions, this deceptive conduct, is targeting our family members. They're geared towards discrediting, speaking ill of certain members of the family, or exposing, sort of disclosing their private matters and confidential information. So, any of you'd say any of these 4 bullet points or even these types of actions would count as a misdeed, against anyone, right? But it becomes all the more serious when it relates to members of our own family. As you can imagine, these are people that we have this closer affinity with. We might live together, we may not, live in proximity within the same area. But why was it so? Why was it so important to have a particular passage dedicated to these misdeeds or misconduct against our relatives? Well, I'll just stop sharing for a minute. If you can think about in the past, these extended families number into maybe in hundreds of members. We might call them large family clans. They would sort of live in the same, fairly close together, obviously not under the same roof, but they would be responsible for providing for various services for the members of that family. So for the young, the children, grandchildren, it would be the family's responsibility as a whole to provide education, ensure that the young were schooled, and as we talked about before, appointing scholars, really learned teachers to educate the younger generations. So they would be skilled up, they would have knowledge to make something of themselves later on. And it would also be the extended family's responsibility as a whole to look after, to care for the aged, so the elderly, as well as those who were ill. And then obviously ensuring that all the able-bodied members of the family could, earn a living for themselves, support themselves by working on the land of the family estate, or it could be, having some role in the family business or trade. So it would be sort of, you'd have the able-bodied adults supporting the young and the old. And these would be really extended families, numbering into maybe even the hundreds of family members. These are large clans, and therefore it's not too hard to imagine how important they were. If you had several of these families, they make up a community, and these kinship ties, structures in place within each of those families would be vital for a thriving, society. So, nowadays, obviously, most people do not live in, large clans. They might have even, moved overseas. And many of those, what we might call social welfare services, are not provided by our extended family, but by government or community organisations. But I suppose the spirit of this particular passage remains the same, in that there's an idiom in English that don't bite the hand that feeds you. The idea that, growing up in that sort of social network, each and every one of those members would sort of owe a debt of gratitude to their extended family for this ongoing support, throughout a person's life. When they're young, having the benefit of that education, having, as they grow older, to be able to contribute to the family itself, and then sort of enjoying being cared for in sort of the twilight years of your life, in your old age. So this would be really important as part of the education of any person in those days, to try to give back, and certainly not to, behave so negatively towards your family relatives, essentially. And I suppose when we sort of transpose this idea to, modern day in a country like Australia, or even the UK, where so many services are provided not by our own extended family. People live in much smaller families these days, but those services, education, schools, medical care, welfare, they're provided through government, community organisations, and it's the idea of giving back however we can, and to the best that we can. So I thought to myself, it's sometimes difficult to imagine, living together with so many people, but in sort of the idea of having to give back. But, in this university, the University of Wales Trinity St David, it was actually established in 1822, and its Royal Charter is actually one of the oldest of the universities in the UK. It's actually the oldest university in Wales, and I think it's the third oldest after Oxford and Cambridge in the UK. But had it not been for the founders, every year we celebrate a Founders Day here, but had it not been for the people who founded this university all those years ago, maintained the buildings, the classrooms, the libraries, from the hardware, these buildings, to the software, the IT systems, etc. How would students still be able to study in this institution? And that, on a very small scale, on a very small level, is the idea of students today, when they enroll at a university, having that benefit of the services and the structures in place that have been, contributed to by generations over, a very long period of time. And the idea is, I suppose, any is to, use this, make the most of this opportunity to study at the university, to learn and develop skills, knowledge, etc., and to make something of ourselves, to serve the community, and ultimately become an alumni that the university, that our school or university would be proud of. So that's the idea of, being part of this larger, extensive structure, and giving back in the best way that we possibly can. And that's why, essentially, fundamentally, it would be a terrible misdeed to mislead or deceive, or, attack and denounce, expose confidential matters, private matters that has been, shared and entrusted to us by our family members. Now, when I looked at the collected commentaries, the explanation for this particular section and the different historical accounts, there's one that particularly struck me, and it's the story of a person by the name of Xue Fu, and he actually specialized in litigation, helping people fabricate claims and litigate their disputes in court. And he had this extraordinary talent that through his words, what could be far-fetched and preposterous, contrary to nature, common sense, reason, etc., would sound or seem as if it was sound and reasonable. So he was very persuasive, and had this ability to make his arguments very convincing. And in fact, that's what he did for a living, and he became extremely wealthy from doing so. Now, this is a person who specialized in, fabricating claims. If you wanted to make life difficult for anyone, maybe your neighbors, or it could be a person in the family, well, this was the person you would go to and to really make that happen. Well, as the years went by, he sort of starts to maybe develop a conscience, or you could say his conscience caught up with him. And he sort of feels sorry or remorseful for all of the things all of these misdeeds that he's done over the years. And he feels so terrible about what he's done that he seeks the services of a Taoist master to help him pray to the heavens and seek forgiveness for his misdeeds. And so this Taoist master, prays for him, kneels down and prays for some time, and then sort of gets up and explains to him that actually, for what you have done, the heavens have you will be bound to suffer the misfortunes of having your house burned down and losing your life by drowning in the future. So this was this most fortunate consequences of all of the misdeeds that he had done in the past, and they were really revolved around how he had helped people fabricate claims and engage in misleading and deceptive conduct, probably including it's not specifically mentioned, so we can understand it broadly against anyone, not just members of their family. And sure enough, not too long after that, his house is burnt down to the ground, nothing left, and he he ends up drowning and loses his life that way. A very unhappy ending, you could say. And sort of read the story and I thought, well, he did seem to feel some remorse, and he did seem to want to try to make things better for himself. And maybe had he, instead of just words of prayer, or had he tried to show people in his community that he had changed, turned over a new leaf, maybe he could have used his skills and his abilities to sort of look into misfortunate cases where people have been unjustly accused or wrongly imprisoned, and work for those sorts of causes. Maybe he could have turned his life around, but clearly it wasn't enough just to have your conscience catch up with you and not do more. And the same point is, it's not specifically mentioned that that the cases that he worked on were specifically targeting people's family members. This was just generally. You can imagine how even more terrible the consequences would be had he acted in such ways towards the members of his own family, his relatives. So there's plenty of food for thought in that one sort of negative account. Now let me just share my PowerPoint again. Okay. So on the next slide, there's actually 4 different accounts, and these come from volume 3. That's specifically dedicated to the good ethics of the family from the Collectanea on the Way and its virtue. And the first relates to the Chen family. They lived in Jiangzhou during around you could say the 10th or 11th centuries. And their account is entitled to Living Close Together for 13 Generations. So this was a family that had lived together for quite some time. Just stop sharing for a little while. Well, there were 13 generations living close together. That was amounted to about 700 people at any one time. This was a very prosperous family, but amazingly an immensely harmonious one. It's recorded that they didn't employ any maids or servants. So the members of the family would take responsibility for taking care of the day-to-day chores, personally looking after the young and caring for the aged, the ill, etc. So really putting that personal effort in, and having all the members of the family benefiting from that personal touch. It's recorded that there were never any divisive words, so could be speech or words designed to drive people apart, break apart good relationships among the family members. None of that in that family. They all got along very well. And you can imagine 700 people. I remember that's in, a few years ago when I was working in London, and the London office was actually the global head office of this international law firm. There would be, just counting the number of lawyers, over 1,000 lawyers on that site, that large office complex. But if you're not counting, the administrative or the IT team, etc., so that would be 700 people, maybe any medium to large company or business organization. you might not have, day-to-day contact with all 700 members of staff, but you might be working very closely in the same office building or a complex, and you might probably interact more with your own the members of your own department or section of that organization. But if we cast our minds back, 1,000 years ago, this was how it had been for 13 generations. This family didn't happen overnight, but they were able to get along very harmoniously and look after each other. It said that they would, everyone would have their meals together in a very large dining hall. And I remember there used to be a staff sort of canteen where I worked, but not everyone would eat at the same time, obviously. But in that family, all the adults would have, be on a certain table. The young children would be also together on another table. And it's recorded that even their dogs would eat together around the same sort of area. And their family was so harmonious that even their pets were affected, and their pets. It's recorded that if one dog happened to be late, all the other dogs would not start eating until everyone was there. So that was the extent of how all the people were considerate and caring towards each other. It's amazing, and that's part of the reason why it was an exemplary sort of precedent that was recorded down for the benefit of everyone else. And what was also amazing about this family was that they built a special building as a library, as a sort of a classroom environment for the education of their children and grandchildren. And this was sort of situated in sort of a countryside residence, and they appointed teachers, invited scholars from far and wide to come and teach their children, their younger generations. But it wasn't only for the benefit of their family members. Other people in the local community, other young children were able to join in on those classes, and it was made such a tremendous difference to those lives. And people, young children who would have missed out on an education would be because their families could not afford to send their children to a school, or couldn't afford to have their own sort of family school. So they had a tremendous, positive difference for that local community. So much so that as more people became educated, and the education would include not just basic skills of learning to read and write, count, etc., but developing the learning to cultivate a good ethical character, to be harmonious, etc. And it's recorded that actually the whole community was transformed because disputes, litigation became extremely rare. So this harmonious family, through their school, their private school, there was also charitable school, contributed to the community, and the whole community was able to benefit from learning. Now, not only was the whole community sort of transformed, but that family received sort of formal recognition, official recognition, because a local magistrate actually, recognised that amazing impact for the rest of the community and excused the members of that family from labour conscription. Now, labour conscription, you might know about conscription in terms of compulsory military service. serving in the armies. Well, labour, that's military conscription. Labour conscription relates to sort of serving, to building of, could be public projects or palace projects for the emperor. Who needed labour for building, could be bridges or etc. But clearly the family was such that the local magistrate didn't want to disrupt them from doing what they did, because it had such an amazing positive impact on all the local community. And that one example really sort of illustrates the power of not just setting a good example, but in helping out each other, living near each other. They were able to pool their resources. They built one large school that served the needs of their own younger generations, but also could accommodate other children from the local community. So it made a lot of sense. They were able to employ teachers from far and wide. They had the resources to do that too. And so sharing those resources just illustrates the strength and harmony, looking after each other, supporting each other. And it's it really shows what can be done when family members work together. It reminds me very much of the acronym TAM. T stands for Together Everyone Achieves More. So that's why I liked that story in particular, and it's in relation to the Qin family from Jiangzhou Prefecture. In the next family, the next story about conduct towards family relatives. Share my screen again. There you have the title. It's about sharing celery and good fortune with the extended family. And this relates to a very famous historical exemplar by the name of Fan Zhongyan. So there's a spelling error here. Should be just Fan, Fan Zhongyan, who came from Suzhou province. And he lived from the late 10th century to the early 11th century. Now, when Fan Zhongyan was very young, in fact, he was around 1 year old, his father passed away, and him and his mother fell on hard times. It was particularly tough for mother and son, and he, as a poor student, he would survive on just one bowl of congee or rice porridge per day. What he would do would sort of divide that one bowl into halves and have sort of half for breakfast, half for dinner, but literally just one bowl a day, and it would be the same every day. But he sort of turned his life around. He studied very hard. He passed the civil service examinations, and he became a government official. And in fact, ultimately rose to the position of chancellor, which is sort of the highest official role. Now, as you can imagine, he would have a substantial salary as a high official. And the Collectanea sort of records his words to his sons. He said, so many family clans are connected to our own extended family. So you can imagine if you drew up a family tree of your own, there'd be people who you share the same surname, and then others who marry into the family. So they have different surnames. And through that, one extended family, many families are sort of interwoven into that family. So he's telling his sons that the fact is that there are so many extended families that are linked to our own extended family, And, from the point of view of our ancestors, so these are the people who've already passed away, we're all one family, essentially. So how could we not do something to try to help those of our family, our extended family, who are in need, who are suffering, cold and hunger? They lack even those basic resources, food and clothing and shelter or whatever. Because if you think about it, yes, I've been extremely successful in my official career, but it is that success and good fortune has been due to our ancestors who've cultivated the merits over, good deeds and the merits over hundreds of years for me to have such good fortune. So he had this, amazingly grateful heart. And he said that, well, if I'm able to enjoy such good fortune today, with such high salary as a government official, and I turned a blind eye to the rest of our relatives. I only care about myself or my own, close family members. How would I be able to face my ancestors when, we go to the ancestral temple to commemorate my ancestors on a seasonal basis, or when I meet them in the next life? So he had this consciousness that the good fortune that he was able to enjoy now wasn't just because of his own intelligence and hard work, just as in the example of the university that I mentioned before. We're able to enroll and to study at university, but that university has come about because of the labours, the efforts of so many people for so many years. All of those people who probably passed on, and he had this consciousness, and he sort of taught his own children in the same way. And so, what did he do? Well, he was the sort of person who he rose to such high ranks because he contributed much to the government and the local community. He is known for advocating a 10-point proposal for government reforms. These were reforms designed to improve administrative efficiency in the central government through better management of human resources. They were geared towards strengthening the local government in terms of improving the agricultural infrastructure, grain transport, canals, etc., and also for improving frontier defences to maintain sort of good order and to try to mitigate the risk of being invaded. So he had this meritorious service towards, in his government role. But what about his family relatives? Because, this passage in the Exalted Treatise relates to how a person treats their relatives, whether of the same surname or a different surname. Well, Fan Zhongyan and his family, even though had the benefit of this substantial official salary, they actually lived very simply. And what he did was he shared his salary among his relatives. And how did he do that? Well, he actually purchased a lot of land with his savings and his salary, thousands of acres, actually. And he used the land as charitable estates. So this would enable relatives, members of his extended family to support themselves by working on the land, and even other members of the community as well, people who are maybe disadvantaged or less well off, and they could work on the land and grow crops from what they've grown from their own efforts. They're able to support themselves, supplement their income, etc. So they didn't need to sort of depend on handouts, essentially. One time, Fan was about to purchase a particular plot of land, and he wanted to sort of use that to build a residence for some of his extended family members. And the geomancer, who's sort of a person who specializes in divination from geometric sort of geographical features, he advised Fan Zhongyan that the land was very suspicious. In fact, the people who lived on this plot of land would be guaranteed to have very talented children, guaranteed to develop extraordinary talent. So when he heard this, he thought, well, actually, why don't we build a school on this land? So it benefit all the children in this prefecture or this province in the area. And that's what he did. So this was the sort of attitude that he had. He wanted to contribute to his extended family members, but also he cared about the wider community as well. So, I mean, these days we hear about similar projects in developing countries where, land is made arable and the local community become skilled. They're taught various skills, the knowledge they need to work on that land, to grow crops that they can help them sustain themselves and their livelihoods. And you can imagine the amount of sacrifice and investment that is required even before, to have that land, make it arable, to educate the local members of the community, to be able to work that land, etc. That's sacrifice and that investment before even the first harvest is grown. So this was Fan Zhongyan who bought thousands of acres of land to be used as charitable estates. And in fact, the income from the charitable estates, he had that managed by responsible elders within the family, and it would be used to contribute to family occasions like weddings, engagements, funerals, other emergency relief situations. And it's recorded that in his time there were about 90 family members, and it worked out such that each member of the family could have 1 pint of grain per day and 1 bolt of silk for the year. There's more than adequate for all of his extended family, and obviously also benefiting the wider community as well. So it made a lot of sense. The decisions that he made, this long-term vision, you could call it, and his attitude to care about and to take responsibility for not just his own family, but his extended family members and the wider community, all those people who are in need. And it's probably no coincidence that he's remembered for this this particular quote. And in English, it translates as being the first to worry about the cares of the state or the community, and the last to enjoy its pleasures or happiness. So that was the sort of person that he was, and he remains an inspiration to many people to this day. And as we've read earlier in the Exalted Treatise, when a person cultivates their good deeds, they're guaranteed to enjoy good fortune. And we can see how he had this successful career. But more than that, all 4 of his sons became, very successful government officials, and then two of them rose to the position of chancellor. So you can see that his good deeds have obviously led by example, taught by example, and had this good influence and instruction for his family members. His sons obviously benefited from the good fortune that he cultivated as well. So that is the story of Fan Zhongyan. Now, share my screen again. The next historical account relates to, is a bit later on, so it's in the 16th century, and relates to Yuan Liaofan, who we might know from the book called Changing Destiny, or Liaofan's 4 Lessons. Now, in that book, which is essentially a record of his instructions to his son, his descendants, about how to improve their life fortunes by cultivating good ethical character and accumulating good deeds. And we hear a lot about, his instructions, his guidance, but relatively little about what his wife did. And this account relates to the choices that his wife makes. And I find it very interesting. The title of the story is called Buying Silk Floss to Clothe the Extended Family. Okay. Now, why did she need to buy silk floss? Well, she was actually going out to buy this floss material to make a winter coat for their son. And, winter coats needed to be warm, and it would be lined with the floss material that silk floss would provide in insulation, be sort of woven into the internal part of the winter coat. And so Liaofan asks his wife, why not just use the regular silk threads? Silk obviously is used for its insulating properties, but I suppose like wool or down today. But in those days they had silk and used that. His wife was going to buy a raw form, the floss form of the silk, to use as the wadding inside, for the lining of the winter coat. Liaofan asks, why don't you use just the regular silk threads? They'll be even lighter, or still keep warm. But his wife replies and says, actually, the regular silk threads are more expensive. So if I buy the silk floss, it's a more relatively raw form of the silk, I'll be able to buy more and make more coats for not just our son, but for maybe others in our extended family who might be in need of a winter coat. And that's what she does. And it really makes sense because, if you think about it, the wadding is sort of sewn into the coat itself, and it will keep you warm, and really no one, makes no noticeable difference. Now, these days, everyone wants to get more for less. But in her case, she was really thinking not just for their family or their son, but by getting more of that wadding material, the raw silk floss, they should be able to make more winter coats for the benefit of their relatives. So having that heart of caring for others, to me, she's an example of, in the day-to-day choices, not talking about big sacrifices, giving up salary or, investing in large plots of land, but in the day-to-day heart of caring and cultivating, setting a really great example for their son in cultivating good ethical character and looking after the extended family as well. So it comes as no surprise that their son goes on to become, he passes the highest level of civil service examinations. He becomes what's known as a presented scholar. And clearly we can see that Liao Fan and his wife, they both sort of cultivated good deeds, brought good fortune not just to themselves, but for the next generation as well. So the idea that this accumulating good deeds is not rocket science. It happens in our day-to-day choices, and we're able to not just benefit ourselves, but all the people around us, including our family. And this particular passage, yes, it's a negative instruction, guidance, warning against negative conduct. But if we sort of flip it and sort of reminding us to really look after our extended members of our extended family. Now, the final story I'd like to share relates to a person called Ding Guangchang, and he came from Guangxi province. Don't have his dates, but he also provides a very uplifting example, someone who cared for the extended family by living very simply. And his case is quite extraordinary because he was actually extraordinarily wealthy. Him and his wife. But even though he was such a rich, wealthy man, his own marriage was no extravagant affair. And, gets to the point, he personally lives very simply. And his wife asks him one day, what's the point of having all this money if you're not even enjoying it? You're not enjoying your own wealth. What's the point? And what Ding, his response to his wife is very incredible. He says, from my point of view, if you were to ask me, I see so many people in need. People suffering from cold and hunger, lacking those basic necessities, you could say. And then there are others who lack the resources to get married and have their own family or start up with their own business to make something of themselves. They don't even have that sort of seed funding, as we might call it today. So many people in need. How could we possibly enjoy ourselves and turn a blind eye to all the suffering and those around us? So that's why I try to get up very early in the morning and work hard and try to really live simply so I can save up and have the funds to contribute to the lives of extended family and as well as the wider community. And he literally got up every morning very early, worked very hard, and he was extraordinarily wealthy. So a very inspirational example. And his wife sort of realized at this point that he wasn't just being strange or anything. This was his sort of very honorable object. And, the two of them work together in being economical and in cultivating the good deeds. He makes the point that, by saving up, we have immense good fortune now, but by saving up that fortune, sharing what we have, doesn't mean that we lose it. Just means that we'll have even more to enjoy later on. By sharing what we have, Aren't we, sort of giving, contributing to others? So helping others will bound to enjoy even more later on. And that was his sort of philosophy to life and his work. Him and his wife had many children and many grandchildren. His family prospered, and it's recorded that each and every one of his children, grandchildren, enjoyed very successful careers. They didn't all become government officials, but in their various endeavours. And this went on for generations. So this attitude, day in, day out, he could have spent it all on himself or his own family and their enjoyment. But that's not something he did. He wanted to, you'd say, invest, use the good fortune, the resources he had available to him, and invest it for the sake of his extended family members and the wider community. Now, very often the both of them sort of go hand in hand by having this heart of caring for those closest to you. It's just a natural development to care for others beyond the extended family. So these 4 accounts in particular offer sort of very uplifting, inspirational examples of going about not heeding the instructions from the exalted treatise of if I go back a couple of slides, there we go, not misleading, deceiving in any of the ways listed here, for the purposes of maligning and divulging the private confidences, confidential information of our family relatives. So I thought that would be a much more productive way of explaining, understanding this particular passage. We certainly have more than enough examples of misconduct from reading the news, I suppose. So I thought this would be a bit more positive and uplifting. And I hope you've enjoyed those historical accounts. Thank you very much for your attention, and look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you very much indeed.